Welcome to Conversations Live. For more than a decade, we've brought you the best in books, entertainment, and current events. When the movers and shakers of the world have something to say to you, they say it to us first. Now, here's your host, Cyrus Webb.
And welcome back, everyone, to Conversations Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. Whether you're tuning in on the radio dial here in Mississippi, we welcome you all back to our show. Through our online affiliates, we're glad you all could be with us, including our iHeartRadio family. We're glad to have all of you with us as well. We're excited to welcome back to our program today Mr. Mathew Knowles. Of course, you know him because of the success of Music World Music. We're going to talk to him not only about what it's been like for him to see the continued response to his first book, The DNA of Achievers, but the book that has a lot of people talking now is his new book called Racism from the Eyes of a Child. We'll talk to him about what led him to write the book, the response that we've been able to see from the book, but also what he hopes you're able to take away from it when it comes to conversations about race and racism and where we are today. And if you're still hearing about the new book, we'll tell you at the end of our segment how you can be able to get it for yourself. But Mr. Knowles, hello to you and welcome back to the program.
Cyrus, thank you so much for bringing me back a second time. I had so much fun on the first time. It's great to be back.
Hey, the pleasure's definitely all mine. There is a lot for us to be able to talk about when it comes to the first book, of course, The DNA of Achievers. But you actually, when you were on with us last time, you set up that you had a new book that was coming out called Racism from the Eyes of a Child. When you first announced it, I was excited to be able to read it. Of course, it's available now through our friends at Amazon.com, and, of course, they can get copies from you as well. But what has it been like for you already to see the way that people are responding to the new book, Mr. Knowles?
Well, the response has been overwhelming, and so in a way that's been very, very positive. But also the comments, is because they haven't read the book. People are taking, unfortunately, sound bites from the book without getting the total context of the book. And I wanted people to read this book from beginning to end. I wanted to share in this book my life. These are not stories. These are things that I had to walk through. In 1952, born in a little small town with less than 30,000 people, Gaston, Alabama, and those summers that I went and spent with my grandparents that had a population of about 2,000 people. And what racism, how it was for us in Alabama, where George Wallace was our governor. Al Lingo was over the state troopers, and that was his cut man. I wanted to share those stories, and I actually have three of my relatives and a friend that talks about what that walk through segregation was like and racism was like in Gaston, Alabama.
Right. You know, there's something you wrote early on in the book, and I think it's so interesting considered, the great buzz right now about the movie Black Panther, and people talking about being excited about being able to see something positive represented in film for one thing, but also such a movement. You said this about racism, and I thought about it when I first read it, and I knew it was something I wanted to discuss with you. In talking about the effects of it, Mr. Knowles, you said this: racism uses as its primary base an eraser to rub out histories and facts, and therefore true knowledge, which we all know has power. It strips that away as simply as neglecting to record if your people were once African warriors or native braves. The thing I thought was so interesting about that is that, there are so many times, even I remember growing up, finding out different things in school, being taught different things, as a lot of people are, and then learning later on those things were not accurate. Is that one of the lingering effects, you think, also of racism, what it has done to not only, of course, to people of color, but also to other generations as well when it comes to recording their history appropriately?
I tell you what, you just put a smile on my face. I, without doubt, know that you read the book because that's one of my favorite sayings in a book, is how that's what racism does. It erases our history, and therefore we don't have knowledge. And if we don't have knowledge, we don't have power. We can see that happening today as we are trying to erase everything Obama did.
Yeah.
Trump is trying to erase it.
Yeah. And I think that is why a book like this that chronicles your life and your experiences is so important. I want to say this too, Mr. Knowles, about sharing the book, and I actually mentioned this to you so our audience knows before we went on here, that, I mean, we got to know you, of course, as an author from the book, The DNA of Achievers. That book really showed not only, of course, your successes and how you became who you are. Do you feel as though this book is appropriate that it did come second? Because a lot of us know you because of what we kind of learned in The DNA of Achievers. Is that why you chose to release that book first and now release this one?
Well, it's all strategy. You know, I talk about the 10 steps of highly successful people in The DNA of Achievers. And one of the 10 steps is planning and being strategic. I wanted to first position myself academia. That's why I went back and got my MBA and got my PhD, and now I have taught for 10 years, 8 years at Texas Southern, 2 years at Fisk University, so that I am a legitimate academician. And so I've written white papers and done all the things required to be an academician. And so I've moved away slowly from the music industry. Yes, it's still part of my life. I still have a record label. I still have artists on the record label. 3,000 songs of content on my catalog. But my real passion today is to educate and to motivate. That's what I do. I have 5 books, and they're sequenced strategically that will be coming out over the next 2 years. And so when I did the DNA of Achievers, the key word was DNA, because the second book I wanted to talk about my DNA. I wanted my kids and my grandkids to know. I didn't even know my great-grandfather's family's name. I didn't know my great-great-grandparents' name. I didn't know my grandmother had brothers and they were twins. I didn't know that, which kind of explains Beyonce having twins from that DNA. I didn't know a lot of things about my family. And again, it's erasing that history that we talked about earlier.
Right. For sure. And, you talk about it. I'm going to go into one of the chapters that really, I think, says a lot about the courage it takes, because I think a lot of times we never know what we're made of until that is tested. I'm going to talk about that. I want to say, for those who are just tuning in, either on the radio side or online, you're listening to Conversations Live. We're excited to welcome back to our program today Mr. Mathew Knowles. Of course, I got a chance to interview him with his book, The DNA of Achievers, 10 Traits of Highly Successful Professionals. He has a brand new book that's out that has people talking that I know you all want to add to your reading list. It's called Racism from the Eyes of a Child. And as we're kind of able to see you grow up in this book and experience things, you talk about the summer of 1963 in the book, Mr. Knowles, and what that experience was like for you. And also, being a teenager and being a part of something bigger than yourself. Courage is one of the things I think that people will think of when they actually read the book, because it does take courage to be able to do anything, knowing that there were risk involved. You talk about in that same time period, people had the fear of losing jobs, and yet they still were willing to make a part of this history for themselves. What was it like for you to kind of be around that kind of courage, and do you think that is really part of what has made you courageous today?
I absolutely think it's made me the person I am today. 63 in this little small town, Gaston, Alabama, is noted to have more demonstrations than any city in America. And it was a small city again, and we're talking Alabama, but these were courageous people, and it wasn't just grown-ups, it was kids. A lot of kids were involved, even in like the Little Rock Nine, the Birmingham church bombings in 1963. It was everyone, kids, grown-ups, elderly. We all got involved, and I remember one night a demonstration we had in front of the Etowah County Courthouse. That word Etowah County, that's also where Judge Moore refused. He wanted to keep the 10 Commandments there. Judge Moore went to Gaston High School, so did I. And for those of you that don't know, this is the man who ran, he was Republican for the Senate just recently in Alabama. He had the president to endorse him and many, many others. But he was defeated because 98% of all registered female African-American voters went and voted, 98%. very proud of that. But the summer of 1963, that was a summer I've gotten beaten up. I've gotten spit on. I've been hit with electric prodders. These things with 3 prongs were made for animals, and we would demonstrate at night, and then we would run to our church, and then we would regroup, and the state police would circle us, and it was awful. It was awful to see these women, what they had to do with the environment that they had to even just to release, go to use the bathroom. It was really, really incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, again, as people are reading this, it really allows us to know a lot of the backstory. A lot of times, Mr. Knowles, as you know, people see where you are today, right? They see what you've achieved. They see the accomplishments. They see the accolades. They don't always know what goes into that. Do you think it's because of where you come from that you do have the appreciation for what you have today?
Well, I have appreciation for the people before me and after me. I have appreciation even more so for what our slaves, our family that were slaves had to go through, the conditions that they had to go through, and they were dollar value. Most people don't realize a slave was worth $500,000, $600,000. And so, that's a very significant number. And so, therefore, you wanted to, regenerate as many slaves as you could, and they did it in such deplorable ways. And then the word colorism that we talk about, which came from slavery, it only came from a slave master, literally at his will, having sex with a slave at his will. And that's where our colorism comes from, and I'll talk about that in a book. But it's time for Black people. When we are together, the number one thing we talk about when Black folks are together is racism. It's time that we don't just talk about that when it's a group of us. It's time that we become strong and powerful, and we empower ourselves to talk to others about racism. Talk to others about what they do that represents racism. It's time for us to step out our comfort zone and speak to others about it, rather than just being quiet in our groups and talking about it.
For sure. And I think this book can definitely have those kind of conversations, which is why I'm so glad that we're able to have a real conversation as well. I told you before on this program, Mr. Knowles, I stay away from sensationalism. It's not my thing. I think you have given us so much in your work, in the DNA of Achievers, and now in this book, Racism, Through the Eyes of a Child, that we're able to actually get a chance to get to know you and get to know your world and know how you became who you are. There is an interesting thing that you discuss in the book, and I want to bring it up, and it goes to your entrepreneurial spirit. You mentioned revisiting a place where you used to work. Is it pronounced Nakalula? Is that right? Nakalula Falls?
Nakalula Falls.
Yeah, so you revisited that in 2017 where you used to work, and you talked about, of course, having this entrepreneurial spirit, even reselling candy. I think a lot of us can even relate to that here in Mississippi. What was that experience like for you?
Well, I was in high school, and because I was a pretty good basketball player, I got the opportunity to work in the summers at this beautiful Nakalula Falls in Gaston, Alabama. It's the foothill of the Appalachian Mountains. And so we have these beautiful mountains in Gaston, Alabama. And our city was once Indian. Coosa River, Etowah County, Nakalula Falls. And again, you see no resemblance of that because, again, history. They erased it. They erased the fact. But I used to work there in the summers, and I'd clean up all these were the pits that you barbecue. And then they had a lot of, going back to the 1800s, replica and some original homes and buildings. And it was very scary because it was a huge park. And my job was to keep order and keep them all of the places clean, the bathrooms clean, the grass cut, and I just wanted to experience that. And Nakalula was this 18-year-old woman that committed suicide. She jumped off of this falls because her father wanted her to marry someone in another tribe. And we always have said that we have this energy running throughout Gaston, Alabama. It's a defiance energy that runs through Gaston, Alabama, and through Nakalula Falls and Coosa River.
Well, I think, being around history, being able to appreciate history has definitely been an important thing for sure. And I think, too, as we kind of look at this book and how it unfolds for us, Mr. Knowles, we're also able to see that even as you went throughout and made a name for yourself, as you even talk about in the book, making a name for yourself in sports, that there were still those divisions that were there. We see it sometimes even today, and being able to decide for ourselves what success looked like based on how people saw us. Talk to us about that, if you don't mind, because I think it's an interesting point in there about wanting to win, and especially, when you know that you're being counted out.
Well, that book did so much for me to just go back and relive some of those earlier years when, I'm a child, 13, 14 years old, and playing basketball. There was only 2 blacks on the team, and going to those smaller towns with 1,000 people, 2,500 people, very, very racially divided, and being the only blacks on the floor, and fighting for your life, and you can imagine all the words they were yelling at us and to us, and we would get off of the bus and get off the floor and run right to the bus and leave. Those were some challenging years, just being one of the first, knowing that those bad incidents that just recently happened down in Florida could have happened any day for us, and we lived that every day, knowing that any of that could happen because of the Ku Klux Klans, because of the temperament of that part of the country at that point. There were three really significant legal rights that were won. 1954 was Brown versus Board of Education. And then in 1955, there was this law called a pupil placement law. But the one that became very significant in 1956 was freedom of choice. And so what that said is that a parent now had the freedom of choice to take their kids anywhere they wanted. But they had an asterisk by it that they didn't share this asterisk. But this asterisk said, if you choose to take your kid over to this white school, you are on your own, and anything could happen. So we knew that. We knew going in that if we went to one of those schools, anything could happen. And that took a lot of courage from parents, the community, and myself as kids. It took a tremendous amount of courage to walk in those schools. Every day you were made to feel less than. Every day, anytime you made a mistake, you were laughed at. And you were, it was awful. It was awful. Just for me to talk about it now makes me relive and bring back the anger of how sometimes that make me feel.
Right. And the sad thing is, and I grew up most of my life, Mr. Knowles, in Mississippi, and I'm proud to call Mississippi home. But of course, we, like other places, we have our history to deal with. One of the things, though, that I think is so sobering is that in all the success that you have had, all that you have been able to achieve, you share in the book an incident that happened, I think, almost a decade ago, when you were in your Rolls Royce and got pulled over by the police. And the experience of that, what that was like for you, to have to sit there and other cars going by you. I mean, you talk about, what it's like for you to discuss it. I mean, did you realize it was still going to have that effect as you kind of revisited it for yourself and then shared it in the book?
Well, at that time, we had so many incidences with black men and women being stopped in their cars and arrested and hanged and killed. So seldom, and I was just speaking the other day that one of the reasons I'm selling a car is that I just don't feel comfortable in it. And so seldom do I drive this car. I'm grateful that I have it. But I was just leaving my office, and the top was down, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I pulled 2 blocks away, a main street called West Gray Street in Houston, and I looked in my rearview mirror and saw this police car and said to myself, I hope this is not going to happen today. And so I pulled to the right lane because it was a 3-lane. I was far left and eventually pulled over to the right lane. The police officer pulls up and stopped me. And he comes out and he's sweating and, he's looking very nervous. And I'm saying, are you okay? And he was like, do you own this car? And I was like, that is a very interesting thing to say. Do you mean, do you own this car, sir? So he says, do you own this car, sir? I said, well, normally you ask for my ID and my registration, so you just assumed I don't own this car, right? And then he didn't say anything, and he got my registration and driver's license, and it must have been 30 minutes later, and people are riding by, and they're taking photos, and, Mr. Knowles, embarrassing me. And he comes back, and he has his gun his finger on the gun, and he's very nervous, and he's written a ticket, and the ticket, and I said, what did you give me a ticket for? And it was for changing lanes in an intersection. I said, well, I've never heard of changing lanes in an intersection. Why don't we just take a look? Well, there's 5 people right there. You might as well just stop right here and just give our tickets all day. He says, but you change lanes in the intersection. And I said, sir, that's impossible. I said, but give me the ticket. I'm very professional, and I always tell people if they get stopped by the police to maintain their cool and just be professional. He gave me the ticket. But the first thing I did is I called his supervisor. And again, that's what my family, that's what people back then in the South did. They didn't just get a ticket. They made action after it. So I called the supervisor, gave him all of the information. He said, Mr. Knowles, we'll take care of it. I'll call you. He called me back in a week or so, and he said they terminated this officer because I wasn't the first who had called. And so the message inside of that, I'm going to tell you a story. You read this in the book. My mother once had an insurance man come up to her door, new insurance man, young white man, and knocked on the door and asked, was Helen Knowles there? And my mother came and she said, sir, there's no Helen Knowles that live here. If you get back in your car, you have 2 choices. You can either knock back on this door and ask for Mrs. Helen Knowles, or you can not do that and get in your car and leave and then cancel my policy. See, I grew up with parents that were strong like that. I grew up with a father who was a volunteer fireman who saved a white man's life that the other firemen who were white didn't want to because he was a drunk. I grew up with my grandfather owning 300 acres of land and being a real businessman. And so I say that because the DNA, and now we're talking about racism, but it also shows that Beyonce and Solange and their grandkids, they come from a different lineage of family, and I wanted them to understand that.
Right. For sure. And I think, too, and I'm so glad I appreciate you sharing that, Mr. Knowles, because I think it goes to another thing that you wrote in the book. And I actually just want to read this from there because I think it says a whole lot about where we are today and why you're able to have the type of attitude you have today. As you're talking about the different things that are going on today, you write this: we deserve the same experience our white counterparts are offered. It's as simple as that. I see improvement and growth when I travel now versus 10 years ago. For us to grow, more education will be needed to bring about an ability for greater earning power. I see more black people getting educated, thanks to the numerous ways we have today for getting a degree and continuing education. And then you write this: I see that type of growth happening in America, and I'm hopeful. So is that what you hope people take away from this book, that there is hope, even though that we still have problems, and even as you're able to reflect on where you've come from and what still goes on, that you are hopeful that we can and will be better?
I am hopeful. That's why I teach. That's why I teach 3 courses at Texas Southern University. That's why I have the Knowles Institute for Entrepreneurship, Entertainment, and Business that you can go online and e-learning. That's why I write books, so I can share my experiences, because knowledge is power. But we have to get knowledge. My fear is that we're spending way too much time on this device called cell phone, and not reading enough, not educating ourselves. I'm really frightened with our young millenniums and even our younger people that fall for the Jedi mind trick when they're given sound bites and they go and that's what they talk about rather than the context of what is being said. But I'm hopeful. And in that book, and the next paragraph or so, I share a story. I had a flight in Los Angeles and literally got delayed 3 times. Got on the plane, had leaking gas, got off, got back on the plane, got off, delayed, tired because it was like 2, 3 in the morning, and my knees were killing me, and I had my carry-out bags. And this is the thing that gave me hope. This little 10, 11, 12-year-old white kid and his parents were walking ahead of him, but he must have seen I was weary and tired, and he opened the door for me. And it was just at that moment I was thinking thinking about my book, and then this little white kid opened the door for me, and I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Thank you, sir." And so then I walked up to his parents because they had no idea, and I said, "Did you know your kid did this?" And they said, "No, we didn't know." But I said, "Well, you should be really proud." So it gives me hope. It gives me hope on both sides that we understand this thing called racism, that we understand that it exists sometimes subconsciously, that we understand that we have to go get help sometimes, as I've had to with years of therapy, just to deal with it. Years of therapy. I don't think I would be alive had I not done those years of therapy.
Wow. Well, I tell you, you're definitely going to be able to have I think, a thorough conversation, I think, among people, Mr. Knowles, because of this book. I think, again, for people who actually take the time to read it, there's so much that's in here that I think they will be inspired by, and also look at themselves with hope and look at the world around them with hope, but also realizing the importance of action. And I think that's the big thing for sure. Again, everyone, Mr. Mathew Knowles has been our guest once again. Great conversation with you. The book is Racism from the Eyes of a Child. It's available through our friends at Amazon.com. You all can also get it and the other book from Mr. Knowles' website, so go to www.MathewKnowles.com, and there you can be able to get both books from there. Mr. Knowles, really looking forward to speaking with you again, and thank you so much for the time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reading the book, because it means a lot to me, and it's a totally different interview when someone's read the book. And we have a lot of surprises for you coming up. We have, not necessarily in this order, but the emancipation of slaves through music will be one of our next book, and it's co-written by 10 of my students at Texas Southern University, and I want to make sure I give them the credit as well. And then we're doing a book on colorism, and then a book on Destiny's Child. So we are working diligently day and night on doing what I love and passionate about now, authoring and teaching. And may God bless you. And to your audience, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all of the years that you've given to me and my family. Much appreciated.
All right. Thank you for that, sir. And we definitely thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live. Until next time, I'm your host, Cyrus Webb, saying, as always, enjoy your day, enjoy your life, enjoy your world. Make sure you take out time to enjoy some good music as well as a great book. Thank you all for choosing Conversations Live today. You all make it a great one.